Hi, and welcome to part 3 of my series on brain driven weight loss. If you haven't yet, I do strongly recommend that you watch part 1 and part 2, and then this video will be even more impactful with that foundational information. Now, if you are a first time viewer, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Coach John McLernan. I'm the head coach at Freedom Nutrition Coaching. And between myself and my clients, we've lost literally thousands of pounds. And I want to help you to become another success story, not just at losing weight, but keeping it off for life. So we do this not through dieting, strict meal plans, overpriced shakes, or crazy workouts, but rather through my unique approach called brain-driven weight loss. So we left off in part 1 of this series talking about how our brain is wired in such a way that we cannot outperform the limits of our belief system. In part 2, we left off talking about how our belief systems form. So we have to learn to work with the brains, and I say brains plural because there's really kind of 3 brains within your brain. And I'm going to talk about those today because we have to learn how to work with them. Now, as I mentioned in a previous video, 95% of our brain functions are unconscious. We're only aware of 5% of our brain function at any given time. Now, this is necessary because there's simply, there's too much information coming our way. There would be way too many decisions to make every single second of every single day if your brain had to try to actively focus on every action and choice you make. For example, what fingers to use to grasp your toothbrush, which muscles to engage with how much force, and so on when you go to brush your teeth. If your brain had to actively engage to make decisions all day long, it would be impossible to function in day-to-day life. So instead, our brain has a way of making most of what we do automatic and unconscious. It's how we can function and survive. So in order to carry out these functions, as I mentioned, we have kind of 3 brains. We have what's called the lizard brain or the primal brain, the limbic or the mammal brain, and then the part that makes us human, the neocortex. So most of the time, we're not actually consciously thinking about the actions we take and the decisions we make. Our decisions are made based on our sense of identity, our belief systems, and our past experience. And then the brain uses the reticular activating system. We talked about that in the second video. The reticular activating system is used to organize things efficiently into what needs your conscious attention and what does not require it. That's your brain being efficient, organizing information to be congruent with your identity and beliefs. So let's talk about these 3 brains and what their overall functions are. So the so-called, lizard or reptilian brain is focused on survival and self-preservation. It's responsible for automation. The mammal brain or the limbic brain is responsible for emotions and where we feel things, and it controls processes like hormones and temperature control. The mammal brain is responsible for habit formation and homeostasis, which means keeping things the same. So these 2 parts of our brain are focused on keeping you alive and safe, automating as much as possible, and then keeping things the same. Then you have the neocortex. The neocortex represents the 5% of your conscious brain. So the so-called mammal and reptile brains represent the 95%. That's where all the unconscious thoughts and feelings and behaviors happen automatically. So you have these unconscious parts of your brain that have these powerful drives for survival, preservation, and maintaining homeostasis. Now, what do? Well, we try to outsmart those parts of our brains by setting goals. And when we do this, we're trying to overcome our brain's drive for automation and equilibrium. Now, who we are in this very present moment is not a product of our grand aspirations, but really a product of our repeated behaviors. So when we say something like, I want to lose 40 pounds, what we're actually saying is, I want to become the person who is 40 pounds lighter and stays that way. So the real question or issue here is, who are you going to be day in and day out to get you to that place where you want to be? Okay, so let's tie this together from what I've just shared around the brain and habits and so on. So 95% of brain functions are unconscious and automatic. So our brain first prioritizes survival, and once that is secure, homeostasis, which includes our habits and repeated behaviors. So think about the things that you do every day on repeat. Wake up, go pee, brush your teeth, drink some water, make some coffee, get some breakfast, pick out clothes to wear. Maybe you have to feed the kids or commute to work. All of this happens largely automatically. You don't really have to think about doing these things. These are habits and automation in action. But try to change those patterns, and all of a sudden it's not so easy, right? And so here's where we get to the heart of the matter, and we ask, how are those habits formed? In short, we can say that habits get wired in through emotions that feel good. Now, I've got no doubt you've heard some version of the "it takes 21 days to form a habit." And it turns out that's not entirely true or complete. Because in order for a habit to form, we require a dopamine response. Now remember, dopamine is that brain chemical that makes us feel pleasure. We could say that dopamine is in fact a learning brain chemical. So if a behavior feels good, we learn to repeat that behavior. Now, here's the kicker. It's the same whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. So eating a bag of chips while watching Netflix late at night has the same kind of response as going out and doing something active and fun. So either way, good habits and bad habits are formed the same way. So let me give you an example from my own personal life. I remember when I was a little boy, I had this great aunt. Her name was Edna, and she used to babysit sometimes. And if I was good, she would give me a coffee crisp candy bar. Even to this day, more than 3 decades later, when I see a coffee crisp, I think of my Aunt Edna. Now, the other side of that coin is the avoidance of pain or discomfort. I'm not going to misbehave because I don't want to miss out on getting my coffee crisp. So our brains, they follow the dopamine response either to pleasure or avoiding pain. And that's how our habits are formed. So thinking about a child learning to walk, at the time of recording this, my son's right in that stage. He kind of wobbles and shuffles and topples. And what's really important here is how I respond to that. So if when he toppled over, I was to rush over, scoop him up, act upset and worried, that would actually deter his learning how to walk. It would trigger sort of an alarm response in his brain. But when he topples over, he looks up to me to see what my response is. And I've got a big smile on my face and I cheer him on and I clap. And so he wants to try again because it feels good to get a happy, excited response from daddy. So he's getting positive reinforcement, and that's encouraging him to repeat the behavior. So he tries again, and I keep cheering him on, and bit by bit he starts to figure it out. And then one day he's going to spot a toy he wants, and instead of crawling over, he's going to toddle over to it, walking, and get the toy. And bingo, there'll be that dopamine response again, right? Positive reinforcement to repeat the behavior. Now, the reason I'm sharing this example, not just because it's a common one, anytime someone wants to encourage you to try something new. But think about this. When we try to force change, when we try to use punishment and restriction, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because we're missing out on the positive reinforcement, the dopamine response. Think about like my son, when he's trying to learn how to walk, if every time he fell over, I mocked him. He might not know exactly what I'm saying, but he would understand the feeling behind what I was saying. Or if I got mad at him when he fell over, could you imagine? It would be really difficult. For him to learn this behavior. So we need that positive reinforcement. We need that dopamine response. So when we're trying to become a new person, we're trying to learn new skills, new habits, new behaviors. And it has to happen through that dopamine response that's created by positive emotion. So things that don't feel good, things that feel uncomfortable, or they're clouded in negative emotion, they don't stick. So if we go back to this, 21 days to form a habit idea, yes, there is a necessary element of repetition if we want the habit to form, but it has to be connected to positive learning responses in the brain. The brain will always reject forced restriction and deprivation. It may not be right away, but it's going to happen eventually. So we need that positive emotion, and that's actually the key part of a habit forming. Now, sometimes we have bad habits that we want to break. How does that work? Because remember, our brains like equilibrium, it likes to keep things the same, because it's easier to keep you alive if we don't rock the boat. That's that 95% part of the brain telling you to stay the same and to not change anything. So even if logically you know that the behavior isn't helpful, it started somewhere, and it started with a dopamine response in the brain. So now imagine how it feels for your 95%, automatic and survival focused brain if you come in like a proverbial bull in the china shop and you start trying to introduce these massive changes. I'm throwing out all the food in the pantry. I'm going keto and throwing away all the carbs in the house. I'm counting macros and I'm weighing all of my food, every bite of food that goes into my mouth. And your brain goes, whoa, 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 hang on a sec. This is too much change, and too much change feels uncomfortable. So the brain's drive for habits, automation, and homeostasis, that will create resistance to your desired change. So now if we think back to that dopamine wave we talked about in an earlier video, that dopamine wave will allow you to overpower that resistance for a period of time. But ultimately, because that's going to fall back down to baseline, it's going to fail in the long term because the drive for automation and keeping things the same wins out because it's always there. It's how our brains are wired. So maybe you know some people that just seem to be healthy. They eat right, they live an active lifestyle. It's just kind of who they are. And that's really, let's say, where you'd like to get to, I'm sure. Getting away from this feeling of constant struggle. We really want to move into this place where it feels natural to do those things instead of as though we're fighting against who we are. And to do that requires that we leave behind this mindset of restriction, deprivation, punishment, forcing yourself to do things against your will. Things like trying to set huge goals or signing up for events, hoping that pressure will be the push that, propels you to change. Because remember, the brain does not respond well to being forced against its will. The brain rejects efforts that feel painful or bad. The brain says, I'm going to fight you, and here's why. So remember that from the survival perspective of our primal, lizard brain, change equals unknown, and unknown equals danger. So that is, if what you're trying to do doesn't match up with your current belief system, if you're trying to be a healthy person, but you firmly believe that you're not, it's going to create this sensation of danger in your primal brain. And while it might sound like strong language to put it that way, when you listen with, say, your thinking brain, remember the primal brain operates on much simpler circuitry. So when the primal brain feels unsafe, quite literally, it will send you the signal to not do the things you're trying to do. Don't get up early. Don't buy that healthy food. Go ahead and eat that donut. You want that chocolate, that bag of chips. Don't work out. You don't have the energy, and so on. The primal brain is sending those signals to stop you from making it uncomfortable with your efforts to create change. So, knowing that this is how our brain works, this is exactly why we must work with our brain instead of fight it if we want to create permanent transformation. So, I know I just threw a lot at you in this series, especially if you've watched the previous two videos. And in the final video of this series, I'm gonna tie it all together and go over how we create lasting change. I'm gonna give you a blueprint. But now, I want to empower you to put this information in action. Here's how. If you haven't yet, I have a bonus exercise that you can do that'll help you take this information that I've shared and set yourself up to powerfully apply this to your individual circumstances. So I want you to go to this link, freedomnutrition.rocks, ROCKS/brain1. That's brain number 1. This will be a series of short questions designed to help you really unlock those patterns in your brain that have been holding you back. Now, just a heads up, of course, this might feel triggering at times. You could get emotional thinking about some of these questions. This is actually a positive thing, and the reason why I'm going to encourage you to take the time to complete it. And it's okay if you need to take breaks throughout and come back to it a couple of different times. Now, if you'd like to take this to the next step, I would like to offer you a complimentary 15-minute power chat where I will personally help you map out your next forward steps. To book your own personal power chat, you can go to freedomnutrition.rocks/power chat. Lastly, if you enjoy these videos and you'd like to get notified when I release a new video, such as the next video in this series, you can go to freedomnutrition.rocks/updates. You can enter your email address, and what I'll do is I'll notify you or send an email every time I post a new video. So thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a real pleasure. Also, please, if you haven't yet, leave a review and feel free to ask a question in that review, and I can reply to that question. And let me know what you'd like to see next. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you in the next video.